everyone. I think we'll get started. Welcome to What Do Users Want? First, they want their slides to respond when they click a button.
I'm Regan, and I've been in project management for about 3 years and working with Erika for a year. That's me multitasking.
She's very efficient. I'm Erika. I'm creative director and co-founder at Us Creative Works, which is a digital agency here in town. And I've been working, I do UX and design, and have been working mostly in Drupal for almost 15 years. Prior to this, I was at Gorton Studios, and prior to that, I was at Twin Cities Public Television.
It's like longer than I've been alive, Erika.
I know. That's true. This is our company, Us Creative. It's a brilliant illustration by Molly. When we founded the company a couple of years ago, Molly, sitting here, and myself, we had a goal of working with mission-based orgs only, with a real emphasis on working in the community. And both of us really valued empathy in all aspects of life and the work that we did, and we wanted to make sure that that was a really important part of our processes and our relationships with clients. So we made this decision that everything that we do, we would prioritize coming at things from a user-centered perspective, no matter what. So here's the thing about nonprofits. They don't always have tons of cash to throw at things like, oh yeah, user testing and user interviews, and let's go out in the field and talk to real users. That's not always available with the kind of work that we did. And we work with a wide variety of clients, everybody from like the Science Museum of Minnesota to like a smaller family foundation. So like there's this really big spectrum of work. And so we decided though, like we know what the value of engaging with users is. There's gotta be a way to make every project budget support that. So we adapted. And today, we're going to talk about the specifics of that approach. We boiled it down to 7 things. The most important and what we've found to be the most important and cost-effective ways to make sure that you really are coming at things from a user-centered perspective. So we'll share tips and real-life experiences, and even like the software and tools that we use to do those things. But as a way to introduce the first of our 7 points, I'm going to show a little video clip. It's a user tester it's a testing session about TurboTax and how they use it. And while you watch, just think about what might be wrong with this picture. Hopefully we have audio.
All right, well, thank you for agreeing to do some user testing today. Before we get started, I want to ask you a few questions. How do you usually use the web or any sort of digital product to prepare for tax season? Do you think you could give me some specific examples? Are none coming to mind right now? That's okay. Let's see. Why don't you turn on your iPad? There should be a site there ready to go. Then you click the power button. All right. Can you open Google Chrome for me? Here you go. Okay. So look at the site. It's called TurboTax. How did you decide if you wanted to use this product? Show me where you would look on this website. Do you have any ideas or thoughts? Where would you click? Where do you want to go? All right, so let's say it's tax time and you decided you definitely want to use TurboTax. Just show me how you start.
So terrible having a mom who does user testing.
love just like the shrug the whole time. So clearly this example is a bit of an exaggeration, but our first point is that in order to design and build and test a user-centered site, you first have to clarify who exactly your users are. So answering the questions, who's using your site and why are they using it? So Clara clearly wasn't using TurboTax. She was a good sport though, putting up with us. So how do we start to answer those questions? Who's using our site and why? We work it backwards. We try to gather all the snippets of information we can find and piece it together to try to understand our audience groups. So we first do this, we first start our search for those clues by doing stakeholder interviews. And so we interview people at the org or on the board that have a stake in the web project. Because as it turns out, just simply asking people who uses your site is a really great starting spot for gathering information about your audience. Also, there's some really nice side perks to doing stakeholder interviews. First of all, this is a really great way to involve people in the web design process that maybe want to be involved, but don't necessarily need to be involved at every step in the process, which can help keep your project on time and on budget. And also, we like doing stakeholder interviews because they're budget friendly, and you can definitely modify this step based on the size of your budget. So if you have a project with a smaller budget, you can simply hand over the tools to the client, teach them how to do stakeholder interviews, help them develop the questions, and how to use less time for stakeholder interviews. So who do we interview? We recommend interviewing plenty of people who actually interact with potential users. So people that are in the field, talking to and interacting with constituents on a regular basis. They'll have a really great perspective having heard the types of questions that people might have and are looking to answer online. And they might have insight on even frustrations that people have had using the site. So what do you ask these people? We ask questions about their relationship with the organization, their motivation for that relationship, and their involvement. We ask about their communications and impressions. So what have they heard people say about the site, and what are their experiences with the site? We ask about their hopes and their goals for a redesign. And finally, we just ask simply, who is this site for? After we've gathered all this information, we'll synthesize all the interviews we've done and pull out themes, pinpoint themes across the different conversations we've had, and combine them all into one place. So in addition to talking to stakeholders, looking at your analytics can also tell you a lot about who might be using your site and help you sort of develop that big picture, overarching idea of who your audience groups are. We also like analytics because it's a really great bang for your buck. You don't have to be a Google Analytics expert by any means, and you definitely don't have to spend hours of time digging into the data to find useful information about your audience groups. So if your budget only will really allow for just looking at one analytic, we advocate for looking at your most popular pages because as it turns out, what people are looking for can often give us a really good idea of who these people might be. So we work with a group called Friends of the Hennepin County Library, and it just so happens that their most popular pages are all their events pages. So their top priority user group are their event goers. But if you do happen to have a lot of time and money, kudos to you. You can certainly take a look at other bits of data in your analytics. So your top landing pages. This is specifically where people start their journey on the site. And this can be different than the most popular pages. So it could be interesting clues to who these people are and how they travel through your site. When traffic spikes occur on the site, so when exactly is your site most useful to people? Since we work with a lot of nonprofits, mid-November happens to be Give to the Max day, so we have a lot of spikes around then. And it's also really helpful to hear what your client's interpretations of those spikes might be. Looking at your traffic sources and referrals, what other sites are linking to you. Looking at devices, are people on mobile or desktop? New versus returning, also important information. And geography, are they all Minnesotans? Are they Russian hackers? That can be useful information, hopefully not. So after doing interviews and looking at your analytics, if you're still not totally sure who's going to your site and why, you can certainly use a survey. It's important to note here that the art to a good user-centered, a site for user-centered design is, or survey for user-centered design, is keeping the survey really short. So really you're just trying to find out two things. How did you get here? And what are you looking for? So all of this information can tell us a lot about users. We like to use Typeform because it's conversational and it's short and it looks really nice. So yeah.
All right, so once you have a pretty good working sense of who your users might be, now it is time to figure out which ones you care about the most. And you have to do this. Like, if you do not rank your users, your design will suffer, your navigation will feel belabored, your interface will feel overwhelming. It's just a really important step because hierarchy is the basis of good design. Just last week, I got a phone call from a friend who works at Metro Transit, and she was doing some usability testing. It sounded really fun. She was doing it on the bus with like these screens that they were testing out. And it turns out frequent riders, like they really wanted more information on the screen, and more occasional riders were feeling really overwhelmed and they just wanted a few key details. And I think she was really hoping, like, oh, there's got to be a way to just have the best of both worlds, and that's kind of what she was struggling with. But honestly, sometimes you just need to make a call and decide which audience is most important for this particular project, because if you try to satisfy both cases, sometimes you're making a worse design for both of those parties. So sometimes we get their requests from clients like early in the process. I want everything on my website to, I just want it to be easy for everyone. I want everybody to be able to get to something, within one click from the homepage. No, you don't. So this is a website that we made for one of our clients, Achieve Minneapolis. As sites go, it's fairly small. I mean, they don't have major content needs, so keep that in mind. See all those tiny little white words? That is about what their site would look like if they could get to everything within one click. That is not a good user experience. So someone's got to work a little harder, but how do you decide who? Ranking human beings seems a little harsh as a process. And certainly, like at the beginning of meetings, our clients are always, everybody's really important to us. But ask yourself this, in this context, like within the context of this website, which of those audiences is going to help us achieve our goal as an organization? And there's obviously, for this project, there's obviously no one answer, but these are some of the lenses that we like to use to consider this question. So frequency is a big one. Like, how often is this audience coming to your site? Obviously, if they're not showing up, it's really hard to serve that audience. So like, Friends of the Hennepin County Library, maybe event goers isn't necessarily their most important for the core of who they are, but those people are there, so what can we do with that? Two, the mission impact. So back to that Achieve Minneapolis, their goal as an organization is to make sure that every single Minneapolis student is career and college ready. So how can the website serve that mission? So they work with lots of audiences. So they are working with employers. Employers are really important to making sure they provide internships, but a lot of their knowledge is gleaned, through emails with their staff. They work with the staff in Minneapolis public schools, but they're also kind of working offline and they're fed a lot of the information. They rely on volunteer programs, oh, like volunteers, like they're the people that come to the website to learn about who they are, and they're the ones that are going to take action through the web interface. So like they're serving that mission, and it's through the website. Who is helped most by the site? Sometimes it's just really clear. Like we work with minlegaladvice.org. They provide online legal advice for low-income people. It's like from point A to point B. Like we have a website that serves low-income people, one and done. And then sometimes it's just about key influencers in your community, like who's most going to amplify a message and share something that you care about. Like we work with the Bush Foundation, and they do this cool magazine site with all sorts of stories about their past grantees. And for them, it's not really about like a specific, like their whole goal is to empower people with great ideas across Minnesota, so that networking and that sharing communication is in and of itself the end goal. So getting those grantees as the main audience. But a little note of caution, who you serve is not necessarily the same as your key users. So Achieve Minneapolis again, students, that's who they serve. That is their ultimate end goal, but those students aren't on the website. So make sure that you're kind of differentiating between those two things. And if you find out as you go through this process, like all of that survey stuff that Regan was talking about, like this is kind of this a little bit of guesswork about who really your audience is. And as you go through the process, if you find out things are a little different, be willing to reassess those priorities and be willing to change who your primary user is if you find out that they're not showing up.
So then after you've used all of Erika's tips to put your audience groups into a priority order, then you're going to want to discover and document everything you possibly can about your users. And it's important and worth it to take the time to understand who they are, because it'll help you stay focused, it'll help you prioritize, and it'll help you have like real tangibles to refer back to throughout the design and build. So as UX consultant, David Travis says, know your users so well that personas aren't needed. And we like that quote because it illustrates our sort of love-hate relationship with personas, which are these little sheets of paper that say, I'm Joe, and I like to go camping on the weekends, or, and create sort of a mental model of who your users are. We feel that if you're going to use personas, they should really be implemented at the end to capture your understanding of the audience group, not to help you develop that understanding. So if you have time at this step, this is a really great place to actually sit down with users and talk to them and ask them questions. Sometimes you might know what a person is doing on the site, but you really don't know how they got there. So sitting down and talking with them and asking them questions is great if you can do it. But when budgets are tight, at the very least, you should make sure you have people in the room that have real experience working with the users. So we start this sort of audience breakdown process by fleshing out each of our audience groups and literally pulling out a big jumbo sheet of paper and writing down, like you saw on the last slide, and writing down everything that the client actually already knows about the user. So everything from demographics to motivations to what device they might be using. Write it all down, and we never, ever, ever skip this step because it's crucial to knowing and understanding who your audience groups are. Note of caution here, though. Sometimes we hear clients say, I think they're probably women, and they're probably rich women, and we really don't. We want to get the information that the clients actually know about their users here. So we start by considering what they say and do, what their attitudes are like in public, their career paths, what might be important to the user, what their fears are and their frustrations, and then demographics. So how old are they? How did they identify? Where did they live? That information. And then we consider why are they going to show up to this site? What are they searching for? Did they find something on social media? Did they get an email about attending an event and were asked to visit this site? Why are they actually coming to this site? And then we take those big jumbo sheets of paper that we were talking about, and they're really messy, and we put them all up on a Trello board. And we use Trello because it's free, and you can get a public link, so you can actually share it with the client, and then they can pass it around and gather feedback. And we put all the audience groups in the far left corner of the board in priority order. And then in each card, we flesh out everything that we had discovered about that user. And then if we have done a persona, or if we have if we have pictures of those notes that we had taken, we'll add that to the card as well.
All right, so now it's time to brainstorm all of those things. So you're back in this meeting with the client, and you've got a great picture of all of your key audiences literally covering the walls from those giant Post-it notes that you just did. And now it's time to brainstorm every single thing that you can imagine them wanting to do on the website. This ends up being really fast and easy once you have laid the groundwork of who these people really are. And you write down one Post-it note for everything you can imagine. If 5 of your audiences are wanting to do the same thing, you only need to write one Post-it note. So classic user tasks are, as a blank, I want to do blank. Like, that's kind of the format. But for this point in the process, we leave out that audience bit just for a little bit, which I'll talk about in a second. And even though everything is inspired by different audiences, it kind of gets in the way of one part of the process. And then after, it really only takes like 5 or so minutes to do this. So like when you see the Sharpies slow down a little bit, then with the whole team, we ask them to group like tasks. And we don't tell them what that means. Like, people often ask, well, how do you want us to group it? It's like, that is up to you. And this helps us have an understanding of how our clients are seeing the information. And again, we're not asking them to group by audience. This ends up bringing up some interesting things. And it's at this point in the process that I feel like you start to understand the fallacy of audience-based navigation. So, sometimes we are like, I imagine that like there's this little hub for volunteers, and I imagine that there's going to be like this little hub for interns, and they'll know where to go, but different audiences often want the same things, and you very rarely show up at a website and like identify who you are. You identify what you want to do. Like, I don't go to a website and say, hey, I'm a mom. I go to a website and, I don't know, say, hey, I really need a self-help book for time management or something. Those two concepts might be related, but it's which thing you think of first. So look at these. These are grouped by audience. This is what happens when you're grouped by audience. Now watch what happens when you remove the duplicates and group by just like concepts. Way fewer Post-it notes. And this is like a tiny little subset of information. So you can imagine how that would multiply like crazy when you were looking at all of the potential user tasks for like an entire site. And then we have the clients give each of those groups a title, and that's really helpful for understanding why they're grouped, and we talk about it. And from here, we make things an offline process again, and we're just really Trello happy. We put them back into Trello, and we work with, and we put the audiences back at this point. So now you can see in parentheses afterwards, audiences get back in the picture, and we do that for a few reasons. One, you can see how many audiences this thing might matter to, this task that's there. It's also a great reminder of just why people are doing this and who they might be. And it also really comes in handy when you're deciding how to run your user tests, which we'll be talking about later. And then we have our clients do prioritization, and we have the columns from left to right. Whatever is the most important goes furthest over the left, least important over on the right, and within each column, the most important thing goes on top, and the least important thing goes on the bottom. So the benefits to spending all of this time talking about users and breaking out all of these tasks, it seriously solves conflicts. Conversations go from being organizational or even sometimes personal or departmental desires to all of a sudden now you're talking about what users want. So like it's really common for us to hear, oh, so-and-so in such and such a department, he's going to be a problem. Like he really wants to do this one thing with the website. But honestly, if you let so-and-so from such and such a department tell me what you want to be on this website, but tell me in this framework, like get that Trello board out, ask that person, hey, so this is what we've been talking about in terms of user priorities, like where would you see that task? It turns out people are very reasonable. Like they do actually understand how to acknowledge, their personal hopes for like their one departmental need amidst like, well, maybe the people coming to the museum are actually the most important thing that's happening here for what we do. Once you have done this work, you also have a good framework for focusing on things. So like thinking back to that Trello list, the stuff in the upper left, that's where you should be spending your most time. That's where you should be spending the most resources. So like this really lets you run fast in the process. Sometimes you can cut out certain wireframes because they're not the most important tasks. You know where to focus your time for the design. When it comes to development, do not spend custom development time on things that are in the lower right of that Trello board. Like certainly there must be something that you can use that's a little bit more out of the box, but invest your time and your resources in those things that you know users really do care about. It also is a great checklist. We end up using this as a checklist for pretty much every deliverable in our process. So like we're making a sitemap. Okay, can people find everything? Like, can you find this thing, this thing, this thing? Like, even if you're designing a sitemap test, like you can go back to this Trello board to use it. Are those things in the wireframes? Oh, when you're testing, when you're in the QA phase, can you do all of these things? A lot of that just what to check work has been done for you, and the list goes on.
So pausing for user input and validation is really useful throughout all times of the process, but if we were just going to pick one time to bring in real users, we would choose usability testing on a site, on a prototype. So if your project is important, you can find just one day to bring in real human beings and sit them down, have them actually interact with the site. And every single client that we've had do this with us has exclaimed like, wow, this is really eye-opening, I've learned a lot. We find a lot of value in this particular user experience. But if you do happen to hit the jackpot and have lots of time and money for bringing in more users on top of usability testing, there are plenty of opportunities to do so, so we wanted to make sure to call those out as well. You can do tree testing and on your sitemap and see if people can easily find what they need to on your sitemap. We use TreeJack for that. You can do card sorting, see how users group things. So you can do A/B testing. So there's a variety of options for you. I just wanted to make sure we call those out as well. But bend over backwards to bring in real humans in front of your site for usability testing.
All right, so obviously we pretty much think in-person usability tests are the best thing, if you can't tell. And it's because you actually get to see people do, like you can observe them, you can see them doing real things. You're not theorizing, you're not guessing, you're just watching. I love this, one of my favorite quotes about user testing. The first rule of finding out what people want, don't ask what people want. So my poor family. So he's my husband. He's a great guy, stand-up guy. Obviously, I like him. I married him. I asked him, I kind of set up a scenario. He thought it was real. I asked him if I could watch him use this drawing feature in Google Drive because I was working on a similar interface, and I wanted to get some perspectives on, what worked and what didn't work for him. And I asked him about, his usage of Drive, and he was excited. He's like, yeah, I use it every day. So he's the right audience, right? Now watch how easy it is for me to make him into a total liar just because he thinks he is helping me. So this is the tail end of a user testing session where he did successfully draw a little heart in Google Drive and he told me, which things he struggled with and could do better.
Do you think this is a tool that you like, that you might use?
Sure, yeah, I could definitely use it. Sure, yeah.
Thank you.
The finger drumming.
That, my friends, is a sham. He hates drawing. He likes to, every time drawing comes up, he likes to say that he got a D in 6th grade art. It's like his visual arts mantra. There is no world in which my husband would actually use any kind of software where he would want to draw anything. But he wanted to help me, and he wanted his feedback to be valuable. So yeah, I could see myself using that tool. So why on earth would people mislead you? Why are people unreliable narrators? You're just asking them about a website. What's the big deal? It's not that they're terrible people. It's just that there are lots of other motivators for why people say and do the things that they do. They do want to please. They want to look smart. They want to give you the right answer. They want to help. They want to just, user testing is kind of a weird situation with a lot of people looking at you. They just want things to be a little less awkward.
Especially if you're in Minnesota.
Yeah, precisely. So what people say is just less trustworthy than what they do. So what's the fix for this? We're really great at observing each other, so fantastic. So set up your tests in a way that relies on observation and not asking. Reproduce as natural of a situation as you can, considering that there are going to be people in a room staring at you, unless you happen to, have a fancy usability lab at your disposal, which is weird for different reasons. So I'm going to walk you through step by step how we run our testing sessions. A little background on the setup. Like I said, we don't use a usability lab. Typically, we have one person being the moderator. There's me in the back. The person missing from this slide is the user, because we didn't have any pictures where the users had signed off on that. I'm usually just asking questions in a very personal manner with that person interacting with a laptop or a mobile device or whatever we're testing on. And then behind me, we've got a projection or a monitor of what's happening so that the person is just looking at a computer, but everybody else in the room. So usually 1 or 2 people from our team and 1 or 2 people from the client team are sitting there watching every motion and taking copious notes. And we typically use 5 to 7 users. So this is a graph from the Norman Nielsen group that shows you after you talk to about 5 users, you pretty much found all the things that you're going to find in usability testing. I think the exact quote from their article is, "Elaborate usability tests are a waste of resources. The best results come from testing no more than 5 users and running as many small tests as you can afford." And we've really found that to be true. We do 45-minute sessions, 5 to 7 people, you can get it done in a day. So in terms of figuring out who's going to be there for your test, handy dandy Trello board, you've already done your work. Look at what the most important tasks were. We often mark them in red. And what audience they're targeted at. In terms of finding those people, offer gift cards. It's nice to give people gift cards when they're spending their time doing this. A lot of people have direct access to the users. If you don't, consider sending out through your newsletter or maybe a social media post. And if you need to get creative, we've worked with some people who work in complementary and integrative medicine. and they did their posting like at a local co-op, and they got a great response because they didn't have any direct access to their users. So you can always go back to the audience breakdown work you did when you were talking about like, oh, what do we know about these users? Where are they? What kind of things are they excited about or into? It's helpful when you're trying to actually find the people. So in order to actually let users to like recreate that natural environment, you've got to be willing to let things change and be flexible while you're in the room. But that doesn't mean that you should not come very prepared. So to fully prep for a user testing session, we write scenarios and tasks. So when I say scenario, I'm talking about kind of the situation the user would be in. Like, all right, imagine that you received a renewal letter because it's your membership is up, and then a task would be the very specific thing you're asking them to do. Like, can you go renew at $5 a month on this website? So we write these. We usually write, 5 to 6 per user testing session, and then we hope to never, ever use them. So here's why. We do not come in hoping to use preset questions. We start with an open interview before, like just the very beginning, sitting down with the user and asking a few quick key questions. The first is, tell me how you use the internet for fill in the blank. So tell me how you use the internet for finding health information. I mean, obviously you choose the thing that has to do with your project. Tell me how you'd use the internet for finding legal resources. And then once you get a sense of that user's experiences, you ask for really specific examples. Like, can you walk me through a time that you did that? And once they give you that, like, you ask for another one, and you take really good detailed notes specifically with their words. And we'll talk about why, because, but the purpose of this is you're trying to make a situation that's more realistic for how you ask your questions. You're trying to hear the words they use, the mental model that they come at things from, and then you're just going to turn it around and ask them their own questions. So like, if they said, oh yeah, I Google information all the time, and I recently looked for something on headaches and pregnancy, bing, you've got your first scenario. So you can say, hey, you were just Googling, imagine that you just Googled for headaches and pregnancy and bring up that page, and you landed on this page. And if they say to you somewhere in the course of discussion something like, oh, I always look for source information about who publishes the information to see if I trust it. And then you got one of your tasks, say, hey, can you tell me, now that you're there on this page, do you trust this information? And then you just sit back and you watch. So there are a lot of what ifs here, though. This kind of makes people nervous to like be off, like just waiting to see what users say to plan your session. What if they give answers that mean they'll never use this website? What if you find out that this person sitting in the room is never going to do these things, never going to use this site that you're working on? That's okay. I mean, we've had great conversations where we've learned more about what that person actually does, and really, like, it's yet again like getting to understand potential users, but you don't want to force a false test. Just ask them about their actual experiences and kind of their journeys through this type of information. Another thing that can happen is it is kind of a weird situation that sometimes people get a little closed or like a little more shy, and maybe they say, yeah, no, I use the internet all the time to look for health information. And when you say, oh, can you give me a specific example? Like I can't think of any right now. And this happens particularly if you're working on, things that might be a little more personal in nature, like the legal help site that we worked on. This is why you come in prepared with your scenarios and your tasks. It's okay to have those in your back pocket if you find out, I really do think this person is the right audience, and I really want to see how they, like, if they're able to do these things. But you don't want somebody to feel uncomfortable for 45 minutes. That is not the goal of usability testing. So we always lay out some ground rules at the beginning, and both with the users and with the team that's in there. So the first one is that your experience matters. We care about what you think, not how other people might do this. And that's really important for the people on your team to understand that every single person doing this testing is valid. So if 4 people did one thing and 1 person did another, this is not the same as doing, scientific trends analysis. Like, you want to understand all the people and why they're doing it, and it counts. The user is always right. It's not your fault if you can't find anything. It's our fault. Like, tell them this. Like, we're working on the website. We're trying to make it better. And even if, and this is why it's important for your team to know, like, even if they're just complaining, like, oh, you know what this site really needs is a search. Gosh, like, that would be so much more useful. I could do such a better job. And there's like a giant search bar right in the middle of the screen, like practically flashing in the middle, and your team is dying because they can all see it. Like, just zip it. Like, in real life, nobody's going to be there to point out that there really is a search bar. So there's a reason they're not seeing it. It's your job to try and understand why. Think out loud, externalize your thoughts. This is something that requires prompting throughout the process. Like, remind them to do it at the beginning, but keep asking them, like, oh, why do you think that? Or tell me why you're struggling right now. Or if they look surprised, say, oh, what did you expect to happen there? And that last one, I think, is probably where we get the best ideas in user testing. So many times people will just solve your UX and communication problems for you because of what they thought should happen. And when they tell you that, you're like, oh, of course we should have done it like that. And then the last one is that we're not going to tell you the answers. So I know it's hard, but if you can't find something, we won't tell you where it is. And if you get to a point where you can't find something, it's okay to give up. If you would give up in real life, it's okay to give up now. And that's also kind of hard for teams to know that, like, you can't just sit there and make suggestions. Like, it's hard to watch somebody struggle, but be reassuring. Don't give them the answer. Oops. Also, having those multiple people in the room is vital. It's because you are not the usability expert. I know. I am not the usability expert. Nobody in here is the usability expert because nobody has cornered the market on understanding human beings. It takes multiple perspectives, and having clients and a designer and a developer, like, that's really helpful to have different voices in the room because we all see different things, and we all have different ideas about why that might have happened, and being able to discuss those is great. Seriously record what you're doing because you think everybody is a unique snowflake, but by the end of the day, it's like, whoa, everybody blurs together. So we use an app called Look Back to take screen videos of what we're doing. And we also take just crazy detailed notes, just using Google Sheets. So we take notes as a team. Everybody has their own tab. In one column, we write down kind of the what's happening, like what they're working on, the scenario, what they actually do. And when I say write down everything, I mean comments, mouse movements, if you see them, if you think they're maybe looking up to the left. And then when you have everybody in the room, it's another great reason to have a lot of people in the room because people are going to literally see different things. And then in between, we call out issues or recommendations in their own column, which is why we also try to reserve at least 30 minutes between each session. It's great while it's fresh in your mind to be able to walk through what happened, flag issues, talk about theories, rank the severity of something, and brainstorm possible issues.
So now that you've gathered all of this important information, what do you do with it? Well, you prioritize it. So it doesn't matter how perfect your site is, there's no doubt that you're going to 100% of the time walk out of that room with more ideas than you can possibly implement, which is really great. It means that your work is set for like the next year. You have plenty of stuff to do after your site is launched. But unless you've hit the jackpot in terms of budget, you're going to need to put that feedback into a prioritized list so you can plan your next phase of work. So the next step is prioritizing all of the ideas you just accumulated. The good news is your users just gave you a really good lens for prioritizing the rest of your to-dos on the project, so which can be really helpful for communications with clients. So for instance, your client might want to spend less time refining like a fancy hover state if they just realize that like the user doesn't understand what they do. So in order to prioritize everything, we first estimate how long tasks are going to take, and then we work with the client to put them into a prioritized list. And then we start at the top, and we get as far down the list as we can in the time that we have. But what if there are more must-haves than there is time allotted? Well, it's better to know that now and have that tough conversation with your client than trying to cram through everything and run out of time. So finally, you'll only get through, like we said, some of the ideas before you launch. So it's important to also keep this list and keep it active after you launch so that you can refer back to it with your client post-launch. And finally, our last major tip is to share. And for all of these processes, you want to make sure that it's a team effort because, as we like to say, digital is complicated and everybody on the project makes hundreds of decisions every day. So it's important to be very clear and communicative about your priorities. So it's our goal as a team to make sure that everybody knows and sees and understands the project mission and purpose, the audience details, the breakdowns, the user tasks in priority order, and then has exposure to the usability testing, so has access to recording and has that information.
Right, so it's kind of just a recap of what we've covered. So I also want to point out that, you know, we've talked a lot in depth about how to do this, but literally steps 2 through 4 can happen in the course of a couple hours in a meeting if you've just done a little bit of groundwork to figure out who your audience is, and that, you know, that user testing can really be boiled down to a day. And obviously there are many different options for how in depth you can do each of these phases. You know, you could spend weeks trying to make sure you have a clear picture of your audience if you want to, but hopefully this has given you some sense of kind of the quickest, most important parts that we've seen. So, time for questions. Drew.
Hi, I've got 2 short questions.
Yeah.
I hope, or hopefully short answers.
Yeah.
So when you say that sometimes you identify somebody who's not going to be like, oh, this person's not going to use the site.
Yeah.
What do you do with their feedback?
Yeah. So I'm trying to think of a specific example. I know it came up when we were talking with health information stuff. So it's like, well, or no, I think that, okay, the legal site's a better example. So if somebody says, honestly, like I have this court person that I work with, and that's how I get information on where I should go for legal help. We ask more information, and it's usually really helpful for ways you wouldn't really suspect. So like you could find out that, oh, like there is a court clinic that's open from these times to these times. Like that's maybe really good information for even like promoting that this site exists. But you can't really, like there's no clear way to anticipate which way that's going to go. You just kind of have to let the conversation lead it and think, like maybe it's throwaway information. Maybe you just realize this person should never be your audience. But given that by this point you've almost always narrowed it down to somebody who cares about something that you're doing, you're usually going to find something pretty interesting.
Right. Or if it's like search information, then you can take those search keywords, for example, and help with SEO stuff in the future after you've launched or while you're launching.
Yeah, that's true. Sometimes it's just specifically the content that you've written, like people looking at this and saying like, well, I wouldn't end up here because I wouldn't look for those things. It's like, well, what would you look for? And that can, change your content. And it's more valuable to have that conversation about what they are looking for rather than, sitting them down and asking them to use words that they wouldn't. What was yours? Did you have two questions?
Second question, have you guys, like the format for the user tasks sounds a lot like BHAT testing. I'm wondering if you've looked into that or thinking about doing that BHAT testing.
Yeah,
it's
cool.
cool. It's actually you can, a way to write tests that are really plain English intelligible, and then you can have the computer test for these things. Like,
oh, yeah.
Be able to click on the search and be able to look and have the computer
you've
verify
talked about
that.
that
Way to,
Yeah, we've talked. So it's like the automated version. Yeah, we've talked about whether the overhead for that is doable for a lot of the more
might be like a half an hour away from getting at least your toes wet.
Yeah,
You're close.
Cool.
Yeah. Cool. We'll chat.
Good tip.
Yeah. Other questions?
Have you used this process for specifically accessibility testing or any of that kind of research? And if so, does anything need to change or does anything not work so well?
We have not done it for that specific thing. There is a place in town, there are a couple of places in town that specifically do accessibility testing, and I'm kind of chomping at the bit to have a client that sits down.
It seems like most of it would work.
Yeah. Do you do accessibility testing?
I work at the University of Minnesota, so it's an aspect of what we do.
Cool.
I'm part of some of the communities internally there that deal with accessibility. But I'm part of a very small team. We don't even get to do half of what you talked about here today.
Yeah.
For normal projects. So.
Yeah. Right now, accessibility is one of those things where we do a lot of the online checklists, and I think every proposal I've ever written is it would be great to do in-person accessibility testing. And everybody always cares about it, but not enough to sit down and do that.
Yep.
Yeah. It's heartbreaking.
Same everywhere.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah.
Had you, kind of the question about getting to the stakeholders that you want to actually interview or observe. And I've done some usability testing. I'm also at the U, and was told that kind of like with survey research, after a certain number of users, that's basically sufficient.
Yeah.
And it was a lot smaller than I thought. I think it was 6 to 8.
For the stakeholder portion.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
did
that's
you find
interesting.
that to be the case? Is there a critical mass where beyond that you're not really gaining much from additional input?
I feel like in terms of stakeholders, I feel like that's probably true. Mostly, I'm just kind of falling from experience here, but that organizations kind of tend to have shared goals and shared languages. So by the time, in faith, doing those stakeholder interviews, by the time we get to number 6, everybody mentioned that they're donor centered and they're, they've kind of all been inundated with a certain language. I would be curious, one of the things that I always wish we did have more time for is the open interview phase at the point at which you think, this is my audience. I think this is my audience, and sitting down with them, and ideally even doing contextual interviews where you get to see how are you using the website right now. I would be curious if that would be more, a wide variety.
That's actually what I had done.
Yeah.
Kind of the guerrilla style, where we would go and actually show them the site in their office, in their native habitat, and get them with, I think, did 10 users, and the person I was working with was oh, that's too many. And sure enough, after about 6,
it really did.
It really started we had the list of feedback that we would go through each time to see was this repeated, blah, blah, blah. And it really did start to repeat. I just wondered if there's any good rules of thumb for how many stakeholders you really do need to observe that you found.
Yeah, we honestly almost never do more than 8. 8 is kind of what we max out at. I guess that either speaks to our attention span or I think it's probably even when our clients are doing it though, that's usually about how many people are representative.
Right.
Max.
Right. And a lot of their shared frustrations are more like generals, like it's too cluttered, there's too much happening on it, and so it's like, okay, well, you can kind of combine all of that feedback into.
I think when asking the question, it's important to differentiate between focus group style questions, which is more kind of what you guys are talking about, versus like actual statistical modeling and B stuff, and actual usability testing, which there are formulas out there that you can just, evanmuller.org, he has a really cool little thing that you can just kind of type in, and it'll give you your ideal sample size of your target. So I mean, we use that to take and identify our overall site traffic in a given month. We have our key segments, and then from that key segment, how many people do we need to hit with those types of tools in order to hit a statistically relevant sample size. Otherwise, if you always use that 6 to 8 or 5 to 8 rule, you're going to get some super wonky results on certain types of tests. So.
Yeah, no, and that's it. Like that slide that was up at one point that like called out things like A/B testing and tree testing. Like it's very different scenario with that stuff. Like this is definitely specific to like when you're sitting in front of a person and just having that qualitative interaction. So yeah, that's a good point. Anybody else? All right. Well, thank you, everyone.